All right, let's dive into Mel Robbins' The Let Them Theory. Um, this book, it's all about relationships, navigating them in a way that really empowers you. And I'm going to say, one of the most intriguing things, at least from what I've read so far, is this whole idea of let them.
Yeah, it definitely makes you think, that's for sure. I have to admit, though, when I first saw the title, I kind of thought, like, isn't that giving up or something? Shouldn't we be trying to, work on our relationships, like actually solve problems together?
I know, right? My first thought, exactly. But, and here's the thing, as I got further into it, I realized it's not about being passive at all. It's more about understanding, recognizing what we actually can control and what we can't.
Exactly. And I think listening to this, you start to realize the let them idea is really about seeing when you're trying to control things, you just can't.
Which is, where Robinson's story comes in.
Yeah.
It adds so much weight to it, to her advice. I mean, think about it. She went from almost like completely wrecking her life financially to becoming this huge motivational speaker.
That contrast definitely grabs your attention. It's like, hey, listen, I've really messed up, but I learned a few things, so you can too.
Exactly. And it's kind of funny, the whole let them theory thing, it actually came to her during a really unexpected event. Her son's high school prom night.
Prom night. That's not exactly like the first place I'd picture having a major life epiphany.
Right. So picture this. It's pouring rain, no dinner plans, and Robbins is, naturally freaking out. But her son and his date are totally chill. They're just like, whatever, let's just go to this little taco place.
Yeah.
And it's that moment, seeing how carefree they are, that it hits her. She's trying to control stuff that's completely out of her hands.
And that's the seed of let them, right?
Mhm.
Accepting that you just can't control other people's thoughts, actions, or feelings, no matter how hard you try.
Okay, but let's get real here for a second. How do you actually let them when it's your own kid making a choice that could, seriously mess things up?
That's where it gets really interesting. And I think that's where Robin's advice is really valuable. She's not saying to just like sit back and watch. It's more about understanding that, yeah, you can offer guidance, support, boundaries even, but at the end of the day, you just can't force someone to make the choices you want them to.
This is that balance, finding that balance between supporting them and respecting, their freedom to choose.
Exactly. And that's where the whole let me side of things comes in.
Right. I love that seesaw analogy she uses. You're on one side, weighed down, trying to control someone, but as soon as you say let them, it's like you're suddenly lighter, higher up on the seesaw.
Because you've let go. You've released that burden of control. And now all of a sudden you can focus on what you can control. Your own reactions, your choices, what you do.
So let them is about acceptance, and let me is about empowerment, starting to see how they work together.
Two sides of the same coin, for sure. And Robbins, she applies this to all sorts of things. Stress, work frustration, even those heated political debates that seem to be everywhere these days.
It's like there's this common thread running through all those examples. She's basically saying, look, instead of letting things outside of you dictate how you feel, shift your focus inward.
Right. Exactly. For instance, remember the story about her being totally terrified to post about her business online, like for years, all because she was scared of what people would think.
Oh, yeah, that fear of judgment. I totally get that, especially when it comes to, like, putting your creative stuff or your work out there.
It's something we all struggle with. But Robbins, she finally realized, you know what? Let them think what they want. It's my business. It's what I'm passionate about. And as soon as she let go of that fear and focused on what mattered to her, her career just took off.
That's such a powerful message for anyone, anyone going against the grain.
It is. And it really speaks to, making sure what you do matches up with your values, regardless of what other people say. And that kind of leads into another big part of the book, relationships. Robbins really believes that strong, healthy relationships, they're essential to a happy life.
But let's be honest, relationships can be, like, really hard, especially now. Everything feels so complicated and demanding.
She goes right into family stuff and how those like unspoken expectations we often inherit can create so much pressure, control, and even resentment.
She even uses step-parent-stepchild relationships as an example. She suggests that step-parents should let them grieve, like actually grieve the family structure they wanted, even if their behavior is difficult.
It's all about trying to understand where they're coming from, recognizing that they're going through their own stuff.
And that's where her idea of frame of reference comes in. She wants us to look past the surface, consider those experiences, beliefs, even values that shape someone's perspective.
And she uses her own relationship with her mom as an example of this. She talks about how her mom was not exactly thrilled when she married Chris, just because he was from the East Coast, meaning Robbins might end up living far away.
And at the time, Robbins felt so judged, like not supported. But now, looking back through this frame of reference lens, she gets it. It wasn't about her mom being controlling. It was about the fear of losing her.
It's such a great example of how shifting your perspective even a little can create so much empathy in a relationship.
I'm starting to see how you can apply this let them idea to so many parts of life.
It's a really versatile tool, and as we get further into the book, we'll explore how Robbins uses this with friendships, romantic relationships, even those really tough situations where someone's dealing with addiction, mental health stuff, or grief.
I'm ready for it. Let's see how this let them theory works in those real-life situations.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Mel Robbins's The Let Them Theory,
Where we're, digging deeper into how this really simple idea, let them, can have such a huge impact on our relationships and even on, like, our own personal growth.
And last time, we were talking about that idea of shifting your perspective, seeing things from the other person's point of view, their frame of reference.
Such a powerful tool for understanding each other, especially when it comes to family stuff. But, Robbins, she brings up this really interesting point about, like, how we tend to make excuses for other people's successes.
Oh, yeah, I remember that part. It's so easy to do, right? You think, well, they had it easy or they just got lucky, instead of actually acknowledging all the work and the choices they made to get there.
It's like we're trying to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
Minimize their accomplishments so we don't feel bad.
Exactly. But Robbins, she wants us to flip that script, to see other people's success not as a threat, but as, like, proof that what we want is possible.
Yeah, and she uses her own experience as an example, talking about how early in her career, she was always comparing herself to these other speakers who seemed to be doing so much better.
That comparison game, it can be so tough, and it can really hold you back.
It can. And it's interesting, Robbins, she actually tried to ignore those feelings of jealousy at first, to pretend they weren't there.
Which, let's be real, never works. Those feelings always come back to bite you.
Right. And Robbins, she realizes she's basically wasting energy on envy and self-doubt instead of, like, actually doing something.
Yeah.
So instead of torturing herself with those comparisons, she decides, you know what, I'm going to learn from these people. See them as mentors, not rivals.
That's such a smart shift, right? Because it's realizing that their success doesn't take away from her chances. It actually shows her what's possible.
Gives her a roadmap, basically.
Exactly. And this is where the let them idea comes in again. She's letting go of that need to compete, that feeling of scarcity, and focusing on what she can learn.
It's that reminder that we're not alone in this. There are tons of people out there who have faced similar stuff and achieved what we want.
And Robbins, she really emphasizes that this applies to anything, work, relationships, health, personal growth, anything.
It's like she's saying, you have the power to choose how you react to other people's successes.
And she uses another example, and it's so relatable, but this time it's about happiness, not just career success.
Oh yeah, this one stuck with me. She talks about how, back when she was struggling financially, her friend was building this amazing dream house.
And Robbins is naturally feeling a bit envious. She even jokes about how she almost, like, combusted when she saw the incredible playroom her friend had designed for her kids.
We've all been there, right? Feeling that twinge of wanting what someone else has.
Totally. And what's interesting is at first she tries to push those feelings down, pretend she's not bothered.
Which, as we know, doesn't really work.
Nope. So she finally has this, like, really honest conversation with her husband, admits how she's feeling.
And I love his response. He's basically like, okay, you want this? Then stop complaining and do something about it. He's not babying her. He's pushing her to take action.
Exactly. And that's when things change. Robbins realizes that she can either sit there and be jealous, or she can use that energy to actually create what she wants.
It's about recognizing that we have a choice in how we react to those feelings.
And Robbins, she's very clear that this shift, it wasn't like a magic overnight thing. It was about consistent effort, hard work, and being willing to make sacrifices.
It's that reminder that those goals, whether it's financial freedom or that dream house, anything, it takes time, dedication, and grit.
And she has this really powerful line, and it really hit me. If you're not where you want to be, the great news is it's all your fault. The even better news is the second you decide to, you can change it.
Wow, that's a powerful statement. But it's also really empowering, don't you think?
It is. It's about taking ownership, recognizing that we have the power to change things, even if it means making some uncomfortable changes.
And that brings us back to that core idea of the let them theory. It's not about giving up or not caring. It's about choosing where you put your energy.
Letting go of what you can't control, like other people's opinions, actions, or outcomes, and focusing on what you can control, your choices, your effort, and your reaction to everything around you.
Such a powerful message of self-empowerment and taking responsibility.
And speaking of responsibility, let's talk about friendships. This is where it gets really interesting because Robbins challenges some of those deeply ingrained ideas we have about how adult friendships work.
I'm ready for this. Friendships can be so tricky, especially as we get older.
Right. And Robbins, she starts by talking about this thing she calls the great scattering.
Great scattering. Sounds kind of dramatic. What's that all about?
It's basically her way of describing how adult life just kind of explodes. People move, change jobs, get married, have kids, start chasing different dreams. All of a sudden, those friendships that felt so easy in college, they take a lot more work.
And it can be so confusing, especially if we're holding on to those idealized versions of what friendships should be.
Exactly. And Robbins, she even shares this really personal story about feeling left out of a friend group back when she was a young mom.
I love it when authors are willing to be vulnerable like that, share their own struggles.
Makes the advice feel more real. So she talks about this close-knit group of families in her neighborhood. They're raising their kids together, doing everything together, like one big happy family.
Sounds idyllic.
Yeah.
But then something changes.
Yeah, and she doesn't sugarcoat it. She says she felt hurt, angry, even bitter when the dynamics of the group shifted and she felt left out.
That's a common experience, right? You think, what did I do wrong? Why don't they want to hang out anymore?
Right, and Robbins, she acknowledges those feelings, but she comes to this realization that friendships changing, it's often not about rejection. It's just about how our lives naturally evolve.
Like that saying, people come into your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime.
And yeah, not all friendships are meant to last forever, which can be hard to accept.
Definitely. Especially if you're stuck on that whole best friends forever thing.
But Robbins, she says these shifts often come down to three things: proximity, timing, and energy.
The three pillars of friendship. Proximity, that's obvious. How physically close you are, how often you see each other.
And timing, that's about where you both are in life, right?
Yeah.
Similar schedules, interests, goals.
Right. And energy, well, that's the energy you bring to the friendship. Are you supportive, positive, or are you a drain?
And all three of those things, they can change so much as we get older.
People move, priorities shift, we grow and change as people.
And that's where let them comes into play with friendships.
Right. It's about accepting that you can't control other people's paths, just like you can't control the weather.
But Robbins, she doesn't just leave us with that feeling of loss or inevitability.
Oh, good. Because that was starting to feel a little bit depressing.
She wouldn't do that. She actually gives some really practical advice for making new friends as an adult, even with all this great scattering happening.
Okay, I'm listening. This is something a lot of people struggle with, especially if they're in a new city, new job, or just feeling disconnected.
Her first piece of advice, it's so simple, but so powerful. Give it a year.
Give it a year. Patience, huh? Not my strong suit.
I get it. But Robbins, she reminds us that building those deep connections, it just takes time.
Especially when you're in a new place, new routines.
She even uses her own daughter going off to college as an example.
Oh, yeah, I remember that story. It took her almost the whole freshman year to find her people.
Right. She was lonely, homesick, but Robbins kept telling her, hang in there, keep putting yourself out there, give it a year.
And eventually it clicked. Good reminder to be patient with ourselves and the process.
And Robbins, she even admits she forgot her own advice when she moved to a new town in her 50s.
It happens. What happened?
She was feeling lonely, isolated, convinced she'd never find her people.
But then she remembered. Give it a year.
She did. And she also took her own other advice, which is go first.
Go first, meaning be the one to start conversations. Make the first move.
Exactly. She talks about how she started saying hi to people at the coffee shop, chatting with people walking their dogs, just generally making an effort to connect.
Being proactive instead of waiting for someone else to do it.
Right. And she emphasizes that it doesn't have to be some big, elaborate thing. A smile, a hello, a genuine question, that's all it takes.
Just putting yourself out there, even if it feels a little awkward at first.
And she has this great term for the kind of network you can build through those small interactions. social scaffolding.
Social scaffolding. I love that. It's like building a support system for those deeper connections to grow.
Exactly. It's about those layers of connection, even if it's just knowing the names of people in your neighborhood. Robbins says that even those small interactions can help you feel less lonely, more connected to where you live.
It's that reminder that community is built on those little moments of connection.
And she even says, be the one to create those opportunities. Start a book club, a hiking group, volunteer, anything that brings people together.
Be an active part of your community, not just someone who's watching from the sidelines.
Let me in action.
Right. It's like
Yeah.
saying, let me create the social life I want instead of waiting for it to happen.
And speaking of creating what you want, Robbins talks about something that causes a lot of frustration in relationships. Trying to change someone else.
Oh, yeah. We all know those people, right? The ones we wish would just do things
I
differently.
really do. Whether it's a partner, family, friend, even a coworker, there's always someone whose behavior bugs us.
And it's so frustrating, especially when you feel like you've tried everything, talking, begging, even nagging, and nothing works.
Robbins dives right into this, and asks the big question, why is change so hard? Why can't people just do what we want?
It's a question that causes so many arguments. But Robbins, she actually gives some really insightful answers.
She lays out 3 big truths about why change is such a struggle. First, it's painful.
Makes sense. Nobody likes doing things that are hard or uncomfortable.
Right. Whether it's waking up early, eating healthier, or finally tackling that project you've been putting off, change usually involves some kind of discomfort, effort, and even setbacks.
So it's not that people are just lazy. It's that our brains are wired to avoid pain.
Exactly. Which leads us to the second truth. Everyone thinks they're the exception.
Oh, I know this one. It's that little voice that says, those rules don't apply to me. I'm special.
Right. We all have blind spots when it comes to our own behavior.
And that brings us to the third truth, which kind of builds on the first two. Pressuring someone to change usually backfires.
It turns into a power struggle and nobody wins.
It's because it triggers that need for control, that need to feel like you have a choice.
Exactly. And Robbins says when someone feels forced, they're less likely to change and more likely to just dig in their heels.
Okay, so we've established that pressuring people is a bad idea.
Right. So what's the alternative?
Well, Robbins introduces this much more subtle, effective approach, and it's all about influence.
She points out that as humans, we're wired to be influenced by the people around us.
We see what they do, the choices they make, the results they get, and we adjust our own actions accordingly.
It's like that saying, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Robbins calls this social contagion.
It's the idea that behaviors can spread through social networks, kind of like a virus. And the key to using this for good is, drumroll please, modeling the behavior you want to see.
Walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Exactly. If you want your partner to exercise more, you start hitting the gym regularly, talk about how good it makes you feel, maybe even invite them along without being pushy.
Show, don't tell.
Right. And Robbins argues that this is way more effective than nagging or making them feel guilty.
Leading by example.
And now, the question everyone's thinking, what about those times when you really need to talk to someone about their behavior?
Because, let's be real, sometimes just being a good example isn't enough. Sometimes you got to address the issue head on.
And Robbins gives us this really practical tool for those conversations called the ABC loop.
ABC loop. Okay, I'm curious. Tell me more.
It's a 3-step process for influencing change, but in a way that respects the other person's freedom while still addressing what's bothering you.
Sounds promising. What's step A?
A stands for apologize, then ask.
Apologize. That's an interesting place to start.
It is. Robbins suggests starting by acknowledging your own role in the situation.
So instead of jumping right into telling them what they need to change, we take a look at ourselves.
Exactly. Have you been pressuring them, criticizing them, contributing to the tension? Owning up to your part can create a more open space for dialogue.
Setting a tone of working together, not fighting.
Right. And after you apologize, you ask.
Okay, we've apologized. Now what? What kind of questions are we asking?
Instead of saying, you really need to start exercising, Robbins suggests asking something like, how are you feeling about your health habits? Or, have you thought about being more active?
Open-ended questions. Encouraging them to think about their own motivations and challenges.
Exactly. It's about getting them to reflect on themselves, not just imposing your solutions on them.
And Robbins has this other cool technique for digging even deeper. The 5 whys.
Such a simple but effective way to get to the root of a problem.
So you just keep asking why until you figure out what's really going on.
That's it. You start by asking the person why something is bothering them. Then you ask why, again in response to their answer. Keep going, ideally 5 times, until you get to that core emotion or belief that's driving their behavior.
Like peeling back the layers of an onion.
And it's important to remember that the goal isn't to get them to admit they're wrong or to agree with you,
It's about helping them understand themselves.
which is the first step towards change.
Okay, so we've apologized, asked some good questions, hopefully got them thinking. What's next?
Step B, back off and observe their behavior.
Back off. That sounds counterintuitive. Shouldn't we be pushing them to take action if we want them to change?
I know it's tempting. But Robbins reminds us that pressuring often makes things worse. After you've planted those seeds of self-reflection, you got to give them space to process, experiment, come to their own conclusions,
Trusting the process.
and letting go of that need to see results right away.
But we're not just sitting back and doing nothing, right?
Right. While you're backing off, Robbins says it's super important to keep modeling the behavior you want to see.
So it's 2 things at once. Planting the seeds with those questions and reinforcing those seeds with our own actions.
Exactly. And finally, we get to step C. Celebrate progress while continuing to model the change.
Okay, so we've apologized, asked questions, backed off, and kept being a good example. What does celebrating progress actually look like?
It's about noticing and acknowledging any positive steps they take, no matter how small.
So if they go for a short walk, we say something nice about their effort. If they skip dessert, we praise their willpower.
Exactly. It's positive reinforcement, showing them that you see and appreciate their effort.
It's definitely a long game, this whole approach.
It is. You need patience, consistency, and you got to let go of that need to control everything.
But Robbins, she argues that this is way more effective in the long run than nagging, guilt trips, or power struggles.
It's about respecting the other person while still encouraging them to grow.
This ABC loop is powerful. I can see how it could help with so many different relationship problems.
It can. And speaking of challenges, Robbins tackles a really tough one, helping someone who's struggling with addiction, mental health, or grief.
This is where it gets heavy, and I imagine "let them" takes on a whole new meaning here.
It does. Robbins acknowledges how painful it is to watch someone go through this, and she says straight up, you can't force someone to get better, even if you want it more than they do.
It's like you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Right. And she doesn't sugarcoat this. She says, and I quote, "You cannot want someone else's sobriety, healing, or health more than they do."
That's hard to accept, but it's so true.
It is. And then she goes on to say that when we try to rescue people from their problems, it can actually prevent them from growing.
Wait, how so? Wouldn't offering support be helpful?
It can be, but she says that when we constantly protect people from the natural consequences of their actions, we keep them from hitting that rock bottom that can actually motivate them to change.
Like what you resist persists.
Yeah.
The more we try to avoid pain, the longer it sticks around.
Right. And Robbins is clear that this doesn't mean we stop caring or stop offering support.
It means we shift our focus from controlling them to supporting their journey.
Exactly. And she gives some really specific advice on how to do this.
I'm all ears. This is something so many people struggle with.
She talks about setting boundaries, making it clear that you love and support them, but you're not going to bail them out of the consequences of their actions.
So it's like saying, I love you, but I'm not going to enable you.
Right. And this can be really tough, especially when it's someone you love.
Because you just want to protect them. But sometimes the best thing you can do is step back.
And let them learn from their mistakes.
Because those consequences, they can be the wake-up call they need.
Robbins also talks about how important it is to offer support without judgment or trying to control them.
Holding space for them with love and compassion.
And recognizing that their healing is ultimately up to them.
It's powerful stuff, and it really challenges that natural instinct to fix things for the people we care about.
It does. But Robbins says that this let them approach is actually more effective and respectful in the long run.
It lets them take ownership of their own healing, and it keeps us from falling into those patterns of enabling and resentment that can damage relationships.
It's about moving from being a rescuer to being a supportive companion.
Perfectly said. Now, on to a topic that's on everyone's mind. Love and relationships.
Robbins dives right into the complexities of dating, heartbreak, and how love works in the modern world.
I'm ready for this. I'm sure Robbins has some great insights on navigating all that.
She does. She starts by talking about how hard it is to find love these days, with all the dating apps and hookup culture, and how it's created a whole new set of rules and expectations.
I hear so many people complaining about the dating scene. It seems like it's less about real connection and more about playing games.
Robbins talks about that in the book. She encourages people to be picky, to watch out for red flags, and to never settle for a partner who doesn't help you be your best self.
So it's about quality over quantity.
Exactly. And she says it's so important to recognize those early warning signs, those red flags that might signal problems down the road.
Like, what kind of red flags is she talking about?
She uses an example of a friend's husband who has some unhealthy habits. He drinks too much, doesn't take care of his health, just generally isn't putting in the effort. Robbins encourages her friend and, all of us listening to really think about those behaviors and decide, are these deal breakers or just quirks I can live with?
Knowing what you're willing to compromise on and what you absolutely won't.
Right. And she shares this interesting statistic from relationship experts, John and Julie Gottman. 69% of problems in relationships are not resolvable.
Whoa, 69%. That's a lot.
Yeah.
So what's the takeaway there?
Robbins is saying that we got to accept that not every issue can be fixed. Instead of trying to change our partners, we need to figure out what we can live with and what's a deal breaker.
Being realistic, right? No relationship is perfect, and some differences are just part of the package.
Right. And Robbins reminds us that even with these challenges, we have a choice in how we show up in our relationships.
Taking responsibility for our own happiness, even within a relationship.
Exactly. And sometimes choosing ourselves means choosing to leave a relationship that's not working, even if it hurts.
Knowing that you deserve to be in a relationship that's supportive, respectful, and makes you happy.
And that brings us to something that can be so hard, but it's also a huge opportunity for growth. Heartbreak.
Ugh, heartbreak. The worst. But we've all been there, right?
We have, and Robbins doesn't try to pretend it's not painful. She says it can feel like the end of the world. It can bring up all these tough emotions, sadness, anger, loneliness, even feeling worthless.
Like your whole world is falling apart.
Robbins gets it. She's been there herself. But she also says that heartbreak is temporary. It's something we all go through. And she gives some really helpful advice for dealing with those emotions and coming out stronger on the other side.
What kind of advice? I'm sure a lot of people listening could use some tips for getting through heartbreak.
Her approach is all about being kind to yourself and accepting what's happened. She says, let yourself grieve, cry, talk about it, don't reach out to your ex, and remember that healing takes time. She even suggests a 30-day no-contact rule to give yourself space and a chance to reset emotionally.
It's about letting yourself feel the pain.
Right.
Not trying to bury it or rush through it.
Exactly. And along with that emotional acceptance, Robbins gives some practical steps for moving forward. Fill your calendar with things you enjoy, reconnect with friends, get moving, find a challenge that makes you feel proud.
Shifting your focus from the past to the present, doing positive things for yourself.
Right. And she asks this really thought-provoking question. If you knew the love of your life was right around the corner and this breakup was bringing you one step closer to meeting them, how would you spend your nights and weekends while you're single?
Wow, that's a great question. It makes you look at being single not as a bad thing, but as a chance to grow and discover yourself.
It does. And that leads us to what I think is the most important takeaway from the whole book, the relationship we have with ourselves.
Our relationship with ourselves, that's so true. It feels like everything else is built on that foundation.
It is. Robin says that no matter what's going on in your relationships with other people, the most important one is the one you have with yourself.
So it's about applying that same let them theory to ourselves.
Yeah.
Letting go of self-judgment, accepting our flaws, and treating ourselves with kindness.
Exactly. She encourages us to enter what she calls our let me era.
Let me era. Love it. What does that look like?
It's about giving yourself permission to be happy, to do what you love, to be yourself, to build a life that makes you proud without needing anyone else's approval.
It's about taking back your power, not just in relationships with others, but in your relationship with yourself.
Right. And Robbins reminds us, you don't need anyone's permission to live a good life. The only permission you need is your own.
It's such a strong message of self-empowerment and self-love.
To illustrate this, she uses this beautiful analogy of the sky.
Okay, I'm curious about this sky analogy. Tell me more.
Imagine standing under this vast sky that's always changing. Sometimes it's blue and clear, other times it's cloudy, stormy. We can't control the weather, just like we can't control everything that happens in life. But we can control how we react to those changes.
So it's about accepting the good and the bad, the ups and downs, knowing that it's all part of the experience.
Right. And just like the storms make the sunshine feel even better, the challenges we face can show us how strong and resilient we are.
It's a reminder that life is a journey, and embracing all of it, the good, the bad, is what makes it meaningful.
And you know what's interesting? Robbins doesn't present let them as some kind of passive resignation.
I agree. It's not about being a doormat or letting people walk all over you.
Right. It's about understanding that real power comes from focusing on what you can control, not from trying to force things or change other people.
Choosing your battles wisely.
Exactly. And she admits that this approach takes effort and being mindful.
It's about breaking those habits of trying to control and fix everything.
But she's also really positive about how transformative it can be when you take back your power in your relationships and in your life as a whole.
And that brings us to love and relationships, a topic that's, well, let's face it, on everyone's mind.
Robbins, she doesn't shy away from the tough stuff. Dating, heartbreak, the whole complicated landscape of modern love.
I'm ready to dive into this. I'm sure she's got some interesting thoughts on navigating all that.
Oh, she does. She starts by talking about how tough it can be to find love these days, with all the dating apps and hookup culture, and how that's created a whole new set of rules and expectations.
I hear so many people complaining about dating these days.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like it's less about genuine connection and more about games.
Robbins talks about that in the book. She's like, be picky, watch out for red flags, don't settle for someone who doesn't bring out the best in you.
It's all about prioritizing quality over quantity.
Exactly. She says it's so important to recognize those early warning signs, those red flags that could mean trouble later on.
I'm curious, what kind of red flags is she talking about?
She uses this example of a friend's husband who has some, well, let's say unhealthy habits, like he drinks too much, doesn't take care of himself, just isn't really trying. Robbins tells her friend and all of us really to seriously look at these things and decide, are these deal breakers or just quirks I can accept?
It's about knowing your limits, right?
Yeah.
What you can live with and what you absolutely can't.
Right, and she drops this interesting statistic from those relationship experts, John and Julie Gottman. 69% of problems in relationships just can't be solved.
69%. Wow, that's a big number. So what does that mean for us?
Robbins is saying we've got to accept that not every relationship issue has a fix. Instead of trying to change our partners, we need to decide what we can live with and what we absolutely can't.
Being realistic, right?
Mm-hmm.
No relationship is perfect, and some differences just come with the territory.
Right. And Robbins reminds us that even with these challenges, we still get to choose how we act in our relationships.
Taking ownership of our own happiness, even within the relationship.
Exactly. And sometimes choosing ourselves means choosing to walk away, even if it hurts.
It's about knowing you deserve a relationship that's supportive, respectful, and fulfilling.
And that brings us to something that's tough, but also a huge opportunity for growth. Heartbreak.
Heartbreak. Ugh, the worst. But we've all been there, right? We have. And Robbins doesn't sugarcoat it. She's like, yeah, it can feel like the end of the world. All those tough emotions, sadness, anger, loneliness, even feeling like you're not good enough.
It can feel like everything's falling apart.
Exactly.
And Robbins gets it, she's been there. But she also says, remember, heartbreak is temporary. It's something we all go through at some point. And she gives some really practical advice for dealing with those feelings and coming out stronger on the other side.
What kind of advice? I bet a lot of people listening would love to hear some tips for getting through heartbreak.
Her approach is all about self-compassion and acceptance. She says, let yourself grieve, cry, talk about it, but whatever you do, don't reach out to your ex. Remember that healing takes time. She even suggests like a 30-day no contact rule just to give yourself some space and a chance to, reset emotionally.
It's about letting yourself feel those painful emotions, right?
Yeah.
Not trying to push them down or rush through it.
Exactly. And along with that emotional acceptance, she gives some practical steps for moving forward. Fill your calendar with things you enjoy, reconnect with friends, get moving, find a challenge that makes you feel good.
Shift your focus from the past to the present.
Yeah.
Right? Do positive things for yourself.
Right. And she has this really interesting question she encourages people to ask themselves. Imagine if you knew the love of your life was just around the corner and this breakup was bringing you one step closer to meeting them. How would you spend your nights and weekends while you're single?
That's a great question. It makes you think about being single not as a bad thing, but as a chance to grow, to figure out who you are.
It does, and that leads us to, I think, the most important takeaway from this whole book. the relationship we have with ourselves.
Our relationship with ourselves. That's a good point. It
Yeah.
feels like everything else kind of hinges on that.
It does. Robbins is really clear about this. No matter what's going on in your relationships with other people, the most important relationship you have is the one you have with yourself.
So it's about applying let them to ourselves, too.
Mhm.
Letting go of all that self-judgment, accepting our flaws, and just being kind to ourselves.
Exactly. She wants us to enter what she calls our let me era.
Let me era. I like that. What does that look like?
It's about giving yourself permission to be happy, to do the things you love, to just be you, to build a life you're proud of without needing anyone else to approve.
It's about taking back your power, not just in relationships with other people, but in the relationship you have with yourself.
Exactly. And Robbins reminds us you don't need anyone else's permission to live a fulfilling life. The only permission you need is your own.
Such a powerful message of self-empowerment and self-love.
To illustrate this, she uses this really beautiful analogy of the sky.
Okay, tell me about this sky analogy. I'm intrigued.
Picture this. You're standing under this vast, endless sky, and it's always changing, right? Sometimes it's bright blue, other times it's cloudy, stormy even. We can't control the weather, just like we can't control everything that happens in life. But what we can control is how we react.
It's about accepting the good and the bad, the highs and lows, and knowing it's all part of the experience.
Right. And just like those storms make the sunshine feel even more amazing, the hard times we go through, they can highlight our strength, our resilience, our ability to grow.
It's a good reminder that life's a journey, not a destination. And embracing it all, the good and the bad, is what makes it meaningful.
You know what's interesting? Robbins, she doesn't present this whole let them philosophy as like some kind of passive resignation.
I agree. It's not about being a doormat or letting people walk all over you.
Right. It's about understanding that real power, it comes from focusing on what you can control, not on trying to force things or change other people.
It's about picking your battles, being
Yeah.
strategic.
Exactly. And she's honest. She says this takes effort, being really aware of yourself and your choices.
It's about breaking those old habits, those patterns of trying to control and fix everything.
But she's also really optimistic. She truly believes that when you reclaim your power in your relationships and in your life, it's incredibly transformative.
And that brings us to the end of the let them theory. What a journey.
It really is. We went deep into the complexities of human connection and the power of letting go.
What really struck me was Robin's focus on self-awareness.
Yeah, it's not just about changing what you do, but about understanding why you do it, the beliefs and motivations behind those actions.
Exactly. That's what makes this book so much more than just a bunch of self-help tips.
It's like a guide to understanding yourself better so you can build better relationships.
And isn't that what we all want?
I think so. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to encourage you, our listeners, to think about how you can apply let them and let me in your own lives.
Where are you holding on too tight? Where are you giving your power away? What would it look like to take that power back and create a life that truly reflects who you are and what you want?
It's a journey, and I think Mel Robbins' The Let Them theory can be a really helpful guide along the way.
It's a book that makes you question your assumptions, think about yourself, and gives you practical tools for navigating relationships in this crazy modern world.
And ultimately, I think what Robbins is teaching us is the art of radical acceptance.
Of ourselves, of others, and of life's imperfections.
Because it's in that acceptance that we find true freedom and peace.
Beautifully said. Well, until next time, deep divers, keep exploring, keep growing, and keep letting go of what no longer serves you.
And remember, you have the power to create a fulfilling life. It all starts with you.
We'll see you on our next deep dive.